Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفتن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود فترى الخلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته ووتد بالصخور ميدان عرضه والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين واللعن الله على أعدائهم أجمعين قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقان الحميد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم آمنا بالله وصدق الله العلي العظيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nisa tells us that, O you who believe, obey Allah and obey Rasulullah and those who have been vested with authority. Here, as far as the first two parts is concerned, Atiullah wa Atiur Rasul, there is no issue. Where it comes to the third portion, which is Atiul wa ulil amri minkum, and those who have been vested with authority amongst you, there is a division amongst the Muslims whereby there is a particular sect, or rather let's put it, the majority accept that whoever assumes power is the one who is in authority. Whilst the Ahl-Shia do not accept this and say only those who have been vested with authority. Now last time we discussed the history of how the Quran was compiled. The second of the two most important aspects of our deen is ahadith. So when we look at Quran, we must also look at the sunnah of Rasulullah Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and also his actions and also the actions and deeds of the Ahlul-bayt alayhim salam. So today we want to briefly look at how the history of ahadith evolved in the time after Rasulullah, inshallah. First and foremost, the definition of sunnah. Sunnah is accepted that any one or all the three of the aspects are equal to sunnah. Whatever Rasulullah spoke, whatever Rasulullah did by action, or whatever happened in front of him in his presence and he did not object, which was a tacit approval and also becomes a sunnah. Now, as for the Ahlul Shia, we say this is extended to all the Masumin and that becomes ahadith. The sunnah and the actions and the deeds and the words of the Ahlul-bayt alayhimus salam also form part of ahadith. And whenever it is proven that the hadith is authentic, it becomes a hujjah, a proof upon us and binding upon us to follow. Now, at the onset, it is necessary that we point out one extreme important aspect, and that is the difference of acceptance of ahadith. The Ahl Sunnah accept ahadith from anyone who is a companion, a Sahaba of Rasulullah, or a tabi'in who is a companion of the companion of Rasulullah, even if that narration does not reach Rasulullah himself. When it comes to the Ahlul Shia, we only accept those ahadith that are going up to the Ma'asum himself, or Janab Fatimatu Zahra, salamullahi alayha. So unless it ends at a ma'asum, we do not accept it as a part of ahadith or sunnah. Yes, these are good people, whatever they did was good. People like Abu Dhar, people like Salman are good. We accept them, but however, if what they narrated does not reach the ma'asum himself, then it is not considered as part of hadith. Now, when we look at the transmission of ahadith, in those times when Rasulullah was there was no printing presses. There was no printers, there were no collections people used to collect on parchments, on skins, on paper, or whatever was available at that time and used to write down. There are two extreme important aspects in a hadith. One is the sanad, which is the chain of narrators or the chain of transmission, as we say. And the second is the matan, which is the context, what it has been said. For example, to understand this, the difference between sanad and matan is a hadith that says Hamad bin Sulma reported from Muhammad bin Ishaq, who reported from Amr bin Shu'aib, who reported from his father, and who reported from his father, who said. Now this entire phrase is a sanad, the chain of transmitters. And what is the matan? The context is that he said that I asked Rasulullah, should I write down everything that I hear from you? And Rasulullah said, yes. I asked again, he says, even what you say in pleasure or anger? And Rasulullah says, yes, because I do not say even in that state except what is haqq. So that is the context of the hadith, that Rasulullah said that he does not say anything except which is haqq, and that we should write down the ahadith. There is no harm in this. Now the part of the sanad is a science in itself, and it is called ilmur rijal, which our ulama do, and these are the ones that are looked at, all ahadith and their sanad are looked into before they are used for any purpose by the ulama, whether it is fiqh, akhlaq, aqaid, history or anything. Now why is that? This is based on the principle of an ayah of Surah Hujurat, when Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu in ja'akum fasikun binabain fatabayyanu an tusibu qawman bijahalatin fatusbihu ala ma fa'altum nadimin. O you who believe, if a fasik, an evildoer, comes to you with a report, whatever the report, good or bad, if it is a fasik, look carefully into it, unless you harm yourself and harm people in ignorance, then become regretful and become sorry for having said what they have said and having accepted what they have said for what you have done. So this is a command of Allah, where it says that when anybody comes with a report, make sure you get its reliability by looking at the person who has brought it. If Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salam alayhi, tells us about Rasulullah, we don't have to look second glance, because we know he is ma'asum, he never lies, he never told anyone to go against the Sharia or against the Quran or against what Allah's command is. But if anyone else brings a report, then we have a problem. Now, one of the reasons our ulama are very picky, or as we say in our language, who look into ahadith very carefully, is because there have been very many fabricators and forgerers of ahadith in the entire period after Rasulullah, from the time of Khulafa up to the time of Imam Hassan al-Askari, salawatullahi wa salamu alayh. The Shia principle is that a narrator must be adil, one who does not sin openly. Besides him, he has to be a Shia Ithna Ashari, he has to be sane, he has to be baligh, and having a good memory is of utmost importance. Now, there are many terminologies in ahadith, like sahih, which means authentic, ahsan, meaning good, muwathaq, which is dependable. Then we have da'if, which means weak, either through chain or the text. And finally, we also have mawdhu, which means fabricated or an outright lie. Now, many times we hear in majalises that there is a mutawatir hadith. Mutawatir means that there are so many chains of the narration of the same hadith that it is the text is correct and the chains are so many that it cannot be wrong. And one of such hadiths that is commonly known as mutawatir, and the one which is the most accepted as mutawatir, is the hadith of Ghadir, when Rasulullah raised Amir al-Mu'mineen and said, Man kuntu mawla fahada aliyun mawla. Now when we saw that example of the hadith, we saw that Rasulullah did not only not refuse to write down the ahadith, he encouraged people to write hadith. And companions like Abu Dhar, Salman, Bilal, and many others were known to be writers and scribes of ahadith of Rasulullah. However, upon the departure of Rasulullah and the event of Saqifa that happened, during the time of first Khalifa, there is a very heart-rending event that took place. Umar ibn Khattab, the second Khalifa, who was not in power yet, announced that whoever had any hadith of Rasulullah written down should bring it to the state under the pretext that it would be published. However, when the simple-minded Muslims went and gave away whatever asset they had as ahadith of Rasulullah, he gathered them all together and burnt them down. Some historians report that there were as many as 10,000 ahadith that were burned down at that time, which were the original texts that were written by the Sahaba who sat with Rasulullah. This was a political manipulation, because Ghadir was so soon to have been forgotten, and the rank of Ahlul-bayt explained by Rasulullah was said in so many ways, in so many occasions, that if the ahadith remained in circulation, then the Ahlul-bayt would be always fought for, whilst the Khulafa will never have the power over people. This was a plotting that went on, to the extent that in the time of the second Khalif, he announced, Mishna kama Mishna Ahlul Kitab. Mishna is the oral narration of hadith that the Jews used to do from the time of Nabi Musa. There was a time when Ubay ibn Ka'b, a Sahaba of Rasulullah, was explaining a particular hadith of Rasulullah, and Umar came and told him that I will beat you if you don't stop. And at that time, in confronting Umar, he gathered the Ansar and said, can you testify that this was said by Rasulullah? And when he saw that the Ansar had all gathered together and they were now testifying and bearing witness of what this hadith was, he confessed to one very important aspect. He says, by Allah, I was not accusing you of narrating a wrong hadith, but I hated to think that the hadith of Rasulullah was becoming manifest. The banning of these ahadith in these very early days after the departure of Rasulullah was a disaster. A lot of these ahadith were lost, and by the time of the rule of and Khilafat of Uthman, there was a scramble to preserve the least that was possible. The 26 years of early Khilafat before Amir al-Mu'minin became the Zahir Khalifa had such a catastrophic effect that the Muslims' attitude towards the Ahlul-bayt had changed for worse. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Ubay bin Ka'ab could gather the Ansar for a hadith that he was narrating from Rasulullah. But there is a very sad event in the time of Amir al-Mu'minin himself, when he announced and asked for those companions of Rasulullah who were present on the day of Ghadir to stand and testify that Rasulullah had announced that he was the Khalifa after him. There were some who did stand, but there were many who buckled up in fear. And in them, amongst them, there was one by the name of Anas bin Malik. He should not be confused with Malik bin Anas, who is the Imam Maliki. Anas bin Malik was a Sahaba of Rasulullah. Malik bin Anas, the Imam Maliki, was born 93 years after Hijrah, so he came much later. Anas bin Malik was amongst there, and Imam pointed to him specifically and said, "Do you not testify? Were you not there?" And he says, "I am growing old, and with all excuses that I do not remember all this and everything." And Imam prayed against him such that he got a disease of leprosy, which he lived for the rest of his life. And he was one who lived for more than 100 years. The Banu Umayyah and the Banu Abbas became even worse than the Khulafa, early Khulafa, especially after the martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'minin, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Muawiyah took control of the Muslim empire, and he began a concerted effort to delete the name of the Ahlul-bayt. In that, he brought up a system by which he would reward anyone who would bring ahadith that would enhance the other people other than Ahlul-bayt to the highest rank and reduce the Ahlul-bayt to the level of laymen of the Muslims. He paid large sums of amounts to these people. And at the same time, there were many convertees who were coming from various faiths and cultures who brought with them their cultural baggages. And they started saying ahadith. And in that you will see a lot of ahadith that reduces the ismat even of the prophets before Rasulullah. The Banu Abbas at the same time were doing the same thing. Even worse maybe sometimes. Amongst the most notorious is the infamous person known by Abu Huraira. Abu Huraira was said to have been with Rasulullah for not more than 3 years. And he has quoted 5,374 ahadith in the Ahlus Sunnah books compared to 1,400 ahadith narrated by all the first 4 caliphs of the Muslims. 4 times more. Shia do not accept any of his hadiths. He is known as the most unreliable because he used to make ahadith, forge ahadith for profit and for favor. An example which we always quote and which most of us know is that there was a trader who had ordered a lot of onions from Akka, a Palestinian port, and could not sell because the supply was much higher than the demand. So he came to Abu Huraira for help, and Abu Huraira immediately coined a hadith saying that Rasulullah na'udhu billah said that whoever ate the onions from Akka would be rewarded a pilgrimage of Makkah. When this hadith spread, he was earning from this marketing of it. So Muawiyah called him. The best part, Muawiyah calls him and says, "Oh Abu Huraira, when did Rasulullah say such a hadith?" He says the same time when he said that Muawiyah is Khalul Mu'mineen, that he is the uncle, the maternal uncle of all the Mu'mineen. So his sword was not single-edged, it was double-edged. He was getting favor from the trader as well, and he started getting favors from Muawiyah as well. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Amongst the storytellers of Banu Abbas, for example, there was one who was in Baghdad saying stories, and he started narrating a story saying that Rasulullah na'uzubillah said that whoever recited La ilaha illallah, Allah would reward him with a bird whose beak is of gold and whose feathers are of coral, and he goes on and on and on and on, so much that if we are to recite that hadith, it will take us 1 hour. And in that, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In that gathering were present Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Imam Hanbali, and Yahya ibn Ma'in, the two most important narrators of ahadith in the Hanbali sect. So they asked him, they said, "Where did you get this story from?" And he says, "I got it from Ahmad ibn Hanbal and Yahya ibn Ma'in." So Yahya confronted him and he says, "This is Ahmad ibn Hanbal and I am Yahya, and we have never heard of this hadith." He says, "I was always told that Yahya is an idiot. Today I know I have 17 other Yahyas and Muhammads that I have taken this hadith from." So these are the storytellers, and unfortunately such ahadiths have been recorded in the hadith books of the Muslims. As far as the Shias are concerned, and that is where our point is, our belief is on the strict ahadith of Rasulullah, where he declared that my Ahlul-bayt is awwaluna Muhammad wa awsatuna Muhammad wa akhiruna Muhammad wa kulluna Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Allah, to preserve His deen, gave us 250 golden years. It was a golden era where at least one of the ma'asum was present amongst the people. And this went on, and they gave us the ahadith of reality. They gave us the deen without explaining, without any ambiguities. And in every era of the Imam, there were eminent companions and ashab for whom the Imam of their time vouched for their trustworthiness and truthfulness. Ashab like Maitham Tammar, Asbaq bin Nubata, Kumail bin Ziyad in the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Abu Hamza Thumali, Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari in the time of Imam Sajjad, Zurara ibn Ayun, Abu Basir, Fudail bin Yasir, Aban bin Taglub, Hisham bin Hakam, and so many more in the time of Imam Baqir and Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. And these are the ones who are such caliber that the Imam himself used to vouch for their trustworthiness and truthfulness when they narrated anything from the Imam. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. However, during this era of the 11 Imams, 250 years, it is believed that the Shias who wrote hadith from the Aimma himself were 6,600 books. Some of them were just simple booklets, maybe very small, but they were total of more than 6,600. But during the Khilafah of Banu Umayyah and Banu Abbas, constant harassment of the ashab, raids upon the houses of these scholars, burning of manuscripts and libraries, and persecution of these eminent scholars resulted in the loss of most of these books. The atrocities were such that they always desired to blow off, or rather turn off, the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Their whole purpose and mission was to remove and to cut out and shut off the light of Allah, but they forgot Allah's promise and will, which He says in Surah Saf, يُرِيدُونَ لِيُطْفِئُوا نُورَ اللَّهِ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ وَاللَّهُ مُتِمُّ نُورِهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. They desire to put out the light with their mouths, but Allah will perfect His light, though the unbelievers may be averse. Upon the martyrdom of our 11th Imam, there were 400 books that were remaining out of more than 6,000 that were there. These 400 are known as Usul Arbamia. These are the 400 foundations of ahadith of the Masumin alayhimus salam. And during the period of Ghaibat-e-Sughra, ulama of that time decided that all these books that are scattered should be gathered and made into some form of classified ahadith subject-wise, so that it becomes easier and the knowledge of the Ahlul-bayt is not lost. And the first scholar to undertake this was Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Yaqub al-Kulaini. He was born a couple of years before Ghaibat-e-Sughra began and died a couple of days before the fourth naib of Imam Zaman, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, died. He was born in 254 Hijrah and died in 329 Hijrah. He was the first to undertake to collect these ahadith, especially the Usul Arbamiyah, and he traveled with focused mind, very hard work and research for 20 years and compiled what we know as Al-Kafi today. Al-Kafi contains 16,000 plus ahadith, which is divided into 3 sections. The first is Usul Al-Kafi, which is the aqaid and the faith, ahadith pertaining to faith of the Muslims, which is in 2 volumes. And then we have Furu Al-Kafi, which is 5 volumes of ahkam, the fiqh and the jurisprudence of the Shia. And then finally the 8th volume is Rawdatul Kafi, the garden, which is basically a collection of ahadith that do not fall under any category of usul or furu. The second compilation in the time of Ghaibat-e-Sughra began with Sheikh Saduq, who compiled Man La Yahdharul Faqih, which has almost 6,000 ahadith. The third compilation, third and fourth, because Sheikh Tusi is the third alim, who compiled 2 books. One is Tahdhib al-Ahkam, which has 1,300 plus ahadith, and Al-Istibsar, which has 5,000 plus ahadith. These first 4 books compiled by these 3 most eminent scholars of the Shias, and the interesting fact is all of them were named Muhammad, and all 3 of them had the kunya of Abu Ja'far. This is our base of collection of ahadith. He lived, as for Sheikh Tusi, he lived in Baghdad and had a very, very large collection and a library of his, which the Banu Abbas of the time, through their terror agents, went and burnt it down, and all manuscripts were lost with it. Sheikh Tusi did not stop there. He migrated from Baghdad to Najaf and established Hawza Ilmiya, through which of Najaf, which was established by Sheikh Tusi, for 1,000 years thereafter produced ulama of high repute and mujtahideen until now. Of the later collections, we have 3 more books that were collected later on from ulama that came later on and who collected and reclassified and edited those ahadith in classification form, not editing the text. and collection of more ahadith, and these are compiled. First is Allama Muhammad Baqir Majlisi, who compiled Biharul Anwar, which is, as we know, in 110 volumes. The second compilation was by Mullah Muhammad Faiz Kashani, who has collected 50,000 ahadith, and largely from Kutub al-Arba with explanations. And this is known as Kitab al-Wafi. And finally we have Wasail al-Shia, compiled by Sheikh Muhammad Hur al-Amili, which has more than 35,000 ahadith, with a comprehensive collection on matters of fiqh and jurisprudence. Consequently, even these three alims, all three of them are named Muhammad, and all three's kunniya is Abu Ja'far. Now, what is the difference between the Shia ahadith collection and the Sunni ahadith collection? The first and foremost difference is they believe that whatever is in their first part, the first 6 books, this is known as Siha Sitta, which includes Bukhari, Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, everything is Sahih and authentic. And then they have the second set, which is Sitta, Ahsan Sitta, which is the most good, and these are also near to Sahih, and these are also by 6 more scholars of theirs. However, there are many modern scholars who do not accept everything in the Sahih Sitta to be correct. They have argued that there are some, and many, we don't need to discuss those at that level, have not only weak, but they are mawdu, they are even fabricated. Whilst the Shia say that every hadith is subject to inspection. And in every era, the ulama of the time inspect the ahadith, the narrations, the narrators, the text, and everything before they rule upon anything based on that ahadith. It is not a blanket sahih. It is something that is always looked at. And there is a very big irony here. Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, which are the 2 most important recordings and collections of ahadith of the Ahl Sunnah, the Shia have always argued that these 2 show a lot of bias against the Ahlul-bayt and show a lot of bias in favor of the rulers of the time. For example, these 2 collections, Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, do not have even one hadith from Imam Muhammad al-Baqir or Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhima. Despite 2 of their 4 imams were taught by these 2 imams of the Ahlul-bayt. Whilst they are liberal in quoting ahadith from condemned people like Umar ibn Sa'ad and Shimr zil-Joshan. So this is the bias that the Shias have always argued as far as the hadith collection of the Ahl Sunnah is concerned. When we look at the whole historical fact, we come to one conclusion, that in every era, the effort was to diminish the light of Ahlul-bayt. But Allah perfected the light of Ahlul-bayt in every era. Despite all the dhulm that the Banu Umayyah and the Banu Abbas did, there was always, they became such that they became Fir'auns and Namruds of their times. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also had a plan and a plot against them, and Allah perfected His light in every era. When we look at the event of Ashura, when after the shahadat of Abu Abdullah and his family and his friends, when the Qafila was imprisoned in chains and Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam was taken from Karbala to Kufa and Sham, when the Qafila reached Kufa, Ibn Ziyad asked for introduction, and Shimr zil-Joshan la'natullah alayhi said, "This is Ruqayya, this is Sakina, this is Rabab, this is Kulsum, and this is Zainab Kubra." When he saw that, and after that, when he saw Imam Zainul Abidin in chains, Ibn Ziyad goes to Imam and says, and who are you? Imam says, Ana Ali ibn al-Hussein. So he says, was Ali ibn Hussein not killed in Karbala? Imam says, that was my brother Aliun al-Akbar. So Ibn Ziyad ordered his Jallad to go and kill Imam Zainul Abidin. At that time, Zainab stood in front of Imam and said, you want to kill the Imam of the time, you will have to kill me. And it is at that time that the protest from the Darbar rised and said, oh Mal'oon, are you going to kill a woman in front of all men? This is how the deen of Allah and the light of Allah has been perfected in every era. Ala la'natullahi al-qawmi al-zalimin wa sayalamu alladhina zalamu ayya min kalabin yankalibun inna lillah wa inna ilayhi rajiun. Ya Allah, on this Shab-e Jummah, Ya Allah, on this Thursday night where your doors of rahmah and maghfirah are open, we ask you, Ya Allah, forgive us all our sins. Ya Allah, grant maghfirah to our marhumeen. Ya Allah, grant siha and shafa to all those who are sick amongst us and elsewhere. Ya Allah, grant us the tawfiq to be in your obedience at all times. Ya Allah, grant us the tawfiq to be able to comprehend the teachings of the Ahlul-bayt and implement them in our lives. Ya Rabb, Ya Rabb, Ya Rabb. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.